Let's face it, on-call firefighting at 2 a.m. is stressful. So there's good news and there's bad news. The bad news is that you probably can't prevent incidents from happening, but the good news is that Incident.io makes incidents less stressful and a lot more valuable. Incident.io is a Slack-native incident management platform that allows you to automate incident processes, focus on fixing the issues, and learn from incident insights to improve site reliability and fix your vulnerabilities. Try Incident.io to recover faster and sleep more. A lot of folks feel overwhelmed when it comes to ensuring that their personal InfoSec posture is secure. As someone who's brooded over his own security setup, I thought it might be useful if I were to expound a bit on my personal approach to securing my computing situation. My goals here are pretty simple: to make sure it's not easy for others to log into my accounts, steal my identity, or install malware, and to also not be totally screwed over if one of my devices is stolen. Now, I want to be very clear on the basis for this posture. I am not a named executive at a multinational company. Who I'm defending against doesn't extend to the Mossad, and the secrets that I protect won't get anyone killed should they be improperly disclosed. I talk way too much to be worth the headache of holding me hostage, so people busting into my home to demand my passwords is simply not part of my threat model. If any of those things aren't true for you, you will probably want to make different choices than I do, because the first step is to understand your threat model. Now then, there are 4 basic components to my personal security posture: enabling protections on my devices, tightening up my logins, making the internet conform to my security standards, and pulling together a smart setup for my SSH keys. Let's start with the basics. Look at your computer, phone, and tablet. Install all of the outstanding software updates, both to the operating system and the applications that you use. Those aren't there because the developers got bored with their jobs and decided to ship a new version number. You're almost certainly missing important protections if your software isn't up to date. Next, ensure that full disk encryption is turned on for all of your hardware. Every platform available today offers some form of this, and you'll never even notice that it was enabled once you check the box. But that single decision to check the full disk encryption box means that the consequences of a lost or stolen laptop, phone, or tablet is, now I've got to go buy a new device, instead of, oh my freaking Lord, my entire life has just suffered a data breach. Now, for the sake of all that's good and holy, be sure that you use a password manager. This provides a couple of very useful protections that aren't always fully appreciated. First, a password manager lets you have incredibly long and complex passwords that, if read aloud, are going to sound like vaguely pronounceable line noise at best. Those are hard to guess. Second, and I would argue more importantly, you're not particularly likely to type your password into a bad actor's website if you don't, in fact, know your password. If your password manager doesn't auto-populate your login info into a website, make for damn certain that you're visiting the site that you think you are. Humans are easy to fool with deceptive domain names, but computers are remarkably bloody-minded about ensuring that you don't drop your banking passwords into someone's Facebook page. Now, even before they started sponsoring my nonsense, I used 1Password for all of this, but there are a whole bunch of password managers out there to choose from. Heck, Apple is increasingly rolling out its own that's built into its browser and operating system. This means that all but 3 of my passwords, as a result of using a password manager, are a string of random nonsense, much like my tweets if you don't know what Amazon Web Services is. I only know 3 of my own passwords: my login password for my workstation, my Apple ID, and the password that lets me log in to 1Password. Without those 3 passwords memorized, it would be really hard for me to log into my computer in the first place, set up a new iPhone, or unlock my password manager. To generate those passwords, I'm partial to an approach and eponymous tool called Diceware. This has you roll a number of dice, either in the real world with physical dice or virtually in a JavaScript app that only runs locally in your browser. Then look up the rolls you got in a giant list of words. So if you roll the dice and get, for example, poppy, symbol, splurge, crept, you can remove the spaces between those words and boom, there's your new password. That said, things will whine and complain at you if you don't do silly things. So after you get your 4 random words, add a symbol or a number to the password somewhere to make password strength requirements stop complaining. For what it's worth, add a number isn't really good advice nowadays. Neither is rotate passwords every X days, but that's a hill I've grown tired of dying upon. Next, you're going to want to enable multi-factor authentication, or MFA, everywhere that supports it. MFA sounds similar to MMA, the acronym for mixed martial arts. They're closer than you think because if you don't enable MFA, either your security person or bad actors are going to metaphorically beat the living snot out of you for your poor choices. There are a few options for what those additional factors look like. SMS messages, codes generated by an application on your phone or desktop, and physical security keys. I personally bias towards using physical security keys, and for redundancy, I use 3 YubiKeys to do it. Understand that they wind up pluralizing that as YALBKey. If you use a lot more than 3, it's all YALBKey, but I digress. One of them lives on my keychain and is always in my pocket. The second is permanently plugged into my desktop. And the third is in my home office, and I only drag it out to add new services to it. If all 3 of those keys are stolen or destroyed at the same time, I figure I probably have way bigger problems than not being able to tweet about it immediately. If that's too much for you, consider using an application like Authy instead. I'm a big fan of it because it syncs between all of my devices, so I don't have to worry about losing my phone and getting locked out forever. I do not use my password manager's built-in MFA support because that compresses multiple authentication factors back down to 1. You're going to want to go out of your way to avoid getting MFA codes via text message. It's not just about having spotty luck getting the codes to actually come through sometimes. Apparently, those texts are also not difficult to intercept or spoof. A small side rant, by the way, AWS's IAM only allows 1 MFA device per IAM account in a bold attempt to make Azure look on the ball when it comes to security. This is shameful. On the other hand, AWS SSO does support multiple MFA devices. Now, here's something I don't do, and that is to take the lazy route by signing up for new services through my Google account. Google offers a federated identity offering, which you see all over the place via the sign in with Google buttons. Google's very good at security, but I don't recommend that people use this option. See, the internet long ago decided that your email inbox was the absolute cornerstone of your online identity. If I can get access to your email inbox, I can effectively become you for basically any online account of yours that I want. Google lets sites scope down which permissions they need access to when you elect to use them as an identity source, but you're not going to read those in depth every time a new thing wants to authenticate via Google. You're going to do what most of us do because you're a human being and we just click OK. The next thing you know, you've just granted access to your entire email inbox to TikTok or whatever.
I come bearing ill tidings. Developers are responsible for more than ever these days. Not just the code that they write, but also the containers and the cloud infrastructure that their apps run on, because serverless means it's still somebody's problem. And a big part of that responsibility is app security from code to cloud. And that's where our friend Snyk comes in. Snyk is a frictionless security platform that meets developers where they are, finding and fixing vulnerabilities right from the CLI, IDEs, repos, and pipelines. Snyk integrates seamlessly with AWS offerings like CodePipeline, EKS, ECR, and more, as well as things you're likely to actually be using. Deploy on AWS, secure with Snyk. Learn more at snyk.co/scream. That's SNYK.co/scream.
Now let's talk about molding the internet to my standards. I'm going to start with something that might be controversial and I don't care. Block ads. It's not optional anymore. We can talk about the ethics of content consumption another time. When third-party ad platforms started becoming attack vectors for malware, I got religion on this.
I block ads network-wide by using something called Pi-hole as a DNS server. I use Tailscale on all of my devices as an amazing and lightweight full mesh VPN, and just so happen to pass out that Pi-hole as a DNS server to all of my stuff, no matter where on the planet I physically am. Suddenly, a whole mess of ads on web pages, mobile apps, and even things like smart TVs just vanish. I get that this is something of a step beyond what many folks are going to want to do to secure things. If you don't want to run your own ad blocking infrastructure, run uBlock Origin instead. I'm also a big believer in encrypting everything. Install your browser's equivalent of the HTTPS Everywhere extension. The EFF provides instructions on how to do this in a bunch of different browsers, and then laugh at the oft-repeated advice from the 90s that freak out about using public Wi-Fi to do your banking or shopping. If your bank doesn't use transport layer encryption in 2022, I'm sorry, but you're going to lose all of your money, assuming you haven't already. The last big key tenet here is to lock down your SSH key strategy. And if you're listening to this, you probably SSH into things from time to time. I'm a big believer in keeping your private keys in secure enclaves or other TPM branded things because of the way that they're built. Universally, they will not let you remove or even gaze upon the private key. This is important. As a result, each device that you get then has its own SSH key pair, and the private key never leaves the device. You cannot have that stolen if it is physically impossible to extract it. On the Mac, I do this via the open source application Secretive. You can optionally set it to require biometric or password authentication for each use. This effectively means that every time I SSH into something, I have to absent-mindedly tap the Touch ID on my keyboard. It's not that heavy of a lift, I promise. On iOS and iPadOS, I use Blink as my SSH client. It also supports using the device's secure enclave to generate SSH keys. I'm sure there's something equivalent somewhere for Android, Linux, Windows, and more, but I don't have those things in my environment. I'm staying in my own lane on this one. I will again call out AWS specifically because the SSH keys that they require for EC2 instances that they can auto-provision do not support the more modern forms of cryptographic protocol that secure enclaves require. Yet again, a swing and a miss on a very basic security thing that uplifts everyone by AWS. Who have you hired from Azure to fill your security department anyway? Just asking. Now, let's be clear. This does mean that over time, I have a lot of SSH keys since each device or instance gets its own. To manage all of this, I simply add the public keys to my GitHub profile so I can easily grab them from anywhere and add them to the authorized key file on any node that I want. GitHub.com/quinnypig.keys lists all of the public keys that I've uploaded to my GitHub account. Every GitHub user has a page like this. That might be a surprise to some of you. I'm of the considered opinion that this is safe. Private keys are private, public keys can be public, and it's all in the name of those things. Now, there are some things that I didn't mention here. People have, for example, asked what email provider I use. The answer is, it doesn't matter. See, this is security advice for humans, and typical human beings aren't going to change their entire email provider for a security benefit just because it is such an annoyingly labor-intensive process. You're likely not going to avoid using common services based upon their security issues if you're like most people. Yes, Facebook is invasive with its privacy stance, but most people are not going to stop using Facebook once it becomes part of their daily life. Telling folks to behave otherwise is simply not realistic. So, in the final analysis, I am just a do-gooder denizen of the internet giving back to my people here when I'm giving this advice. It's not what I do day by day. But in all earnestness, I do hope that having some insight into my approach will help folks tighten up their personal security posture. As always, please feel free to scream at me on Twitter if I missed anything notable.
This has been a Humble Pod production. Stay humble.